All right, welcome to part 3 of the dragging and dropping inventory tutorial. I'm just gonna start right where I left off. So going back to the inventory widget, if we go to the graph and go back to the event graph, so we have this add item function that's now set up. And again, it's creating one of our item objects and giving it the item class that we want to use, and we're adding it to the tile view. So we can now call this function. So back in the third person character, we're at the beginning. The event tick. We're checking for all the items that we're overlapping with. And for each one of those, we are getting the class. And here we want to say inventory add to add item. Yeah, add item, like so. And like, why is that not working? Actor class reference is not compatible. Now, we might have to cast this. Cast to item base class. I didn't even know that was possible. Okay. Yeah, so cast it to an item base class. And one cool thing you do with cast, a lot of people don't know this, is if you right click right here and convert to pure cast, then it gets rid of the little execution lines. And I think, don't quote me on this, I think it's quicker because I don't think it does any, I don't know, I might just be lying. I think it's quicker, but it might not be quicker. But it's nice because you don't have to drag the lines in. But yeah, it needs to be converted to an item base class, and we know that this is safe to do because, again, we filtered for the item base class. So the only items in this array are item base class items. All right. Let me make sure that's it. Oh yeah, so one more thing we have to do is, now that it's added to the inventory, we want to just literally destroy it, because like I said before, if it's in the inventory, we just want to destroy it because we don't want to, have these hidden items everywhere that are floating around and like pretending to be in the inventory. So we just want to like straight up destroy it, because if we ever remove it from the inventory, we're just gonna create it again. So just say destroy actor off of the array element, and do that at the very end here. And yeah, something like that. All right, so now if we go ahead and rerun this, honestly not too sure what will happen. So walk over that, it destroys it, and if we go to our inventory, we can see that we do have something showing up, a little white square, and we have another one showing up. And yeah, so the reason that's happening is because we haven't written the code to show the actual image of the item on the tiles, but it does know they're there and they are getting added, which is good stuff. So what do we do next? Okay, so we got the inventory widget, which is then adding items to the tile view. Okay, so yeah, so we need to go back to that inventory entry widget class. So open this guy up again, and like I was saying before, we can now fill out this function. So again, this function gets called when an item gets added to the tile view, and then once it's like fully added, it calls this function. And this object that gets passed to us is this object that we constructed. It's the BP item object. So since we know what it is, we can do a cast to BP item object. And again, we can just do, if you right click, we can just do a pure cast because we know it's going to be this type, so we don't have to worry about it. And we're going to want to right click this and promote to variable so that we can save it, because we're going to want to reference this guy later. So this is our, I'm just going to rename it to item object. And the last thing we need to do in this function is set the image, because if you remember, the image was just this white square. We want to set it to whatever the image is of this item object. So if we get the item class, you can actually get the defaults for that class. This is kind of the neat thing in Unreal. So we're looking at the item class, which again, the item class is going to be, one of these guys. It's going to be our sword, or it's going to be our item, or it's going to be our flashlight. And again, these items have a thumbnail in them, and it's their defaults. So if we get our defaults here, you'll see the thumbnail is right there because that's our only default. But if we had more, they would show up here as well. But we can get the default for the class, even though an instance of the class doesn't actually exist, which is kind of cool. So this thumbnail is what we want. So we're going to take our image, and we're going to say set brush from texture, and that is the texture, and hook that up like so. So now if we compile and rerun this, hopefully we should see, there we go, our flashlight and our sword, just like we expected. So now the last thing we kind of need to do is hooking up the drag and drop, because obviously if we drag these, it has no clue, it doesn't care. So this part is a little tricky, but hopefully it shouldn't be too bad. And yeah, so we only have one more widget left that we haven't touched yet, if I can find it. This inventory drag widget. So that's basically the last one we need to fill out. We need to do a couple things real quick before we can create that though. So if you kind of think about it, when you're running it, we want to know when one of these tiles is clicked, right? We don't really care if you click anywhere else. We only really care if you're clicking on one of these tiles. So we want to do the detection in the tile class, which is this inventory entry widget, this guy. So there's a handy little function that we can override called on drag detected. Now you might be thinking to yourself, oh, that is pretty handy, but it's not quite that simple, because this isn't going to get called unless you manually kind of call it yourself. And to do that, you need to listen to the on mouse. I don't remember what it's called. I gotta look at my notes. Hold on. I can't remember which one it is. On mouse button down. On mouse button down, yeah. So in here, we just need to say off of the mouse event, detect drag if pressed. And we want to specify the left mouse button as the one we care about, and we'll drag this off to here. So basically what this is saying is when the left mouse button is down on top of this widget, detect if a drag is being initiated, detect if we're dragging the mouse while it's down when this left button is down. And if it is, then it returns, it returns something that basically makes Unreal call on drag detected. So if you don't have this here, then on drag detected will never get called. It's kind of stupid, but just the way it works. So now that this will actually get called, we can do some stuff. So the first thing we kind of want to do, so if you think about it, if you pick up an item and you drag it, you want to actually remove it from the inventory because you want it to follow the mouse, and you want it to, follow the mouse. So you want to remove it from the inventory, and you want it to follow the mouse. Those are the two things you want to happen. So the first one's pretty easy. Remove it from the inventory. To do that, we can bring in our item object, and we want to basically get that list view. And if you remember, we set the outer to the list view. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, here. So when we constructed the item object, we set its outer to not the list view, the tile view. We set its outer to the tile view specifically for this reason, so that we can easily get access to it. So if we come back here and we say get outer object, we're gonna cast to tile view. And again, I'm just going to do a pure cast because we are not worried about it messing up. And we're going to say remove item. And the item we want to remove is this guy right here, which is, ourself, basically. So we're saying, hey, somebody is dragging me. Please remove me from the inventory. And so that's the first step. And then the second step is, again, to kind of make it follow the mouse. And to do that, we need to create a drag drop operation. At least that's what it's called in Unreal. So if you right click and search for drag drop, you'll see at the top here, create drag and drop operation. This is what we want. And go ahead and hook that up and hook that up and return that as our operation. So this takes in a few things. The first one is drag drop operation. Don't want to touch that. Don't need to touch tag. Payload is kind of interesting. So what the payload is basically, if you think about it, when you're dragging and dropping something, when you're dragging it across the screen, obviously you need a visual indication of it, and that's what this visual indication thing is, the default drag visual. But it also like represents an object, like it represents the sword. So the payload is kind of the sword in this case. It's the object that the thing you're dragging actually represents. So the payload is going to be the item object. And the drag visual, well, we could make it ourself because it would be, it would make sense for it to be ourself because, ourself is the image of the sword, right? But the issue with that is we just removed ourselves from the tile view, but then we're adding ourselves to the drag and drop operation. So fun fact, if you do that, Unreal crashes. So you don't want to do that. You need to create a different class to represent the drag drop visual. And you probably guessed it, that's what this one is for. So this one is going to be pretty simple. It's going to be basically what our other one was, but only the image. So we're going to set the custom size here, say 128 by 128, and we want the size box. Drag that in, and we just want an image here, or no, we want a border, don't we? Yeah, a border, and we want a image, like so. No, I forgot. Hold on. We need the uniform grid panel first, and then we need the border, and then we need the image, like so. And the border we want to stretch, and the image we want to stretch, and the borders, brush color. Again, you can set this to anything you want. If you set it to something different than what it is in the inventory, then it will like kind of change colors when you go to drag it. And if you want that, then you can. This basically allows you to make the image when you're dragging it different than what it was before. Like maybe you want to add a border or something to it. It kind of gives you freedom to do that. In my case, I don't really want to do that, so we're just gonna keep it as is. Yeah, so I think we set it to 0. I don't remember actually, but that's probably good. 0.25, and again, that was the border we changed. It's just being covered up by the image right now. So yeah, that's what the border looks like, and there's our image. And then the only thing we have to do is we have to set this image to something, and we can do that in the constructor. So get rid of all this. So in the constructor, we're going to say image and set brush from texture. And yeah, so we need a texture, and we're just going to make this a variable that somebody can set. So promote it to a variable, and we'll call it texture. And we want to say edit instable and expose on spawn. So now, whoever creates this guy is going to have to give us a texture, and then whatever texture they give us is the one we're going to use. So that's all we have to do for this drag drop guy. It's pretty simple. So go ahead and close it. And then back in the inventory widget, no, inventory entry widget. So in between here, we want to create that drag widget. So say create widget, and we want to create a drag widget. And this is our texture that we exposed on spawn. So the texture that we want, we can get from the item objects defaults again. So get item class, get default, and that's our thumbnail. And the owning player is just get owning player. And yeah, so this is our drag visual, and that is that. So I believe that's all we need to really do there. So now when a drag is detected, it will delete the item from our inventory so that it doesn't show anymore in the inventory. And we're going to create a drag operation, and Unreal is going to take care of the rest for us. So if we go ahead and replay this, we should at least be able to drag things now. Ooh, it gets very tiny. Why did it get so tiny? Probably messed up the drag inventory. Ah, yes, the size box we need to set to 128 by 128. Let's build this again. There we go. So you can see when we drag it, it starts dragging it. And as soon as we drop it anywhere though, it just kind of goes away because we're not handling the drop, we're only handling the initial drag of it. So this is working as intended so far. So like I just said, the last thing we need to do is we need to handle the drop. So yeah, if we look at this real quick and kind of think about it here, if we drag it and we drop it out here, we want the item to show up in front of the player. If we drop it in the inventory somewhere again, we're just going to add it back to the inventory. And if we drop it like on top of another item, again, just going to add it back to the inventory. You can handle these cases however you like in your game, but for the sake of time and simplicity, I'm just going to say if it lands anywhere in the inventory, just add it back to the inventory. So we need to handle the drop in two places. We need to handle it in the inventory widget in the event that it lands, pretty much anywhere except for on another item. But we also need to handle the case where you land on an item. So we'll do the inventory one first because that's like, that's most of the time that's where it's going to land is in the inventory. So go to the inventory widget and under overrides in the on drop, we will override that. And let's see. That's not like my notes because this function is one of the larger ones. So yeah, the first thing we want to check is whether or not the item was dropped outside of the inventory border or not. So go back to the designer real quick because we want this border. We want to know the geometry of this border. So click on this border over here on the left, and I'm just going to rename it F2 and say inventory border. And then if you come up here on the top right, you can check this is variable, and that will give access to it. That will give us access to it over here in the graph. So now you can see on the left here we have access to the inventory border. So we want to say inventory border get cached geometry and is under location, and we're basically checking if the pointer event is under this location, or is the mouse on top of the inventory border. And so we want to say get screen space position, and that is our coordinate there, like so. Oh gosh, okay, whatever. And then hold down B, we'll create a branch. And kind of get rid of this guy for right now. We'll go up like so. So yeah, so this is saying, dropped in inventory, question mark. So if it is dropped in the inventory, again, we just want to add it back to the inventory. So to do that, we're just going to get the object and say add to inventory. So you might be thinking, oh no, where's the object? We don't have access to the object. Well, yes we do, because we have this operation. And this operation is this guy right here that we returned from the create drag drop operation back in the inventory entry widget. So we have access to this operation. And this operation, again, remember, it has the payload, which the payload is this item object. So we can get access to the item object by getting access to the payload. So if we go back to our inventory widget, so we have our operation here. So I'm going to say get operation, and we want the payload. So this payload is the object that we want to add. So we'll say tile view number 174, add item, and hook that up like so. And there we go. So now it's going to be back in our inventory since we dropped it back in our inventory. Scooch this over. But yeah, so the main use case is that they're dragging it outside of the inventory because they want to drop it. And to do that, there's probably like a billion different ways you can do this. And I tried to come up with a simple way for this tutorial because I didn't want to spend too much time on this. So basically what I did is back in the character blueprint, I just created a scene component and added it to the character. And then I just kind of went like, boop, boop, like that. And say, yep, that's where it's going to spawn. So again, this is not really the point of this tutorial, so I just came up with a quick way to do it. But, you know, you might want to like try to figure out a better way to spawn him. The main point is that you don't want to spawn it directly below the character because then he's going to pick it back up immediately because he's going to be overlapping with it. So you got to kind of spawn it in front of him, you know, very similar to how Minecraft does it. And I'm just going to rename this to item drop location. So now that we have that, we can go back to our inventory widget, and we are going to say, eventually, spawn actor from class, and the actor that we're going to spawn is going to come from our item object. And remember, our item object is our payload, so copy this, and we're going to cast it to an item object, because we know that it is one, and so we can do a pure cast, since we know. And we'll get the item class from this, and that is the class that we want to create, so we'll hook that up like that. And we'll kind of hook this up to perfect. And the transform is basically the transform of this thing. So we need to get access to our player from here. So we'll say get player character, and we'll cast this to third person character. We'll do a pure cast, and get item drop location, and we want the transform of this. Bam. Look at that. So again, we're just saying if it gets dropped somewhere in the inventory, check if it's on top of the inventory border, which is this brownish thing. And if it is, then just go ahead and add it back to the inventory. And if it's not, then that means we're trying to drop it somewhere outside the inventory, and go ahead and spawn it and put it on the ground. And we should probably true to indicate you handled the drop operation. Well, we handled the drop operation no matter what, so we're just always going to return true. So I guess we'll put this here, and we'll put another one here, like so. Alrighty, so that is that. So if we go ahead and rerun this now, you'll be able to see, hopefully it works in most cases. So if we drag it out here, it pops up in front of us. If we drag it and drop it in here, it pops back in. And yeah, so that looks like it's working well. And we can pick them up again. But one little bug we'll run into is if you drop it right there, that actually seems to work. Well, maybe it's not actually an issue. I thought it was going to be an issue if you didn't handle that, but it seems like that's working fine. So just kidding, never mind. Looks like the tutorial is finished. I guess one thing to note on this though, If you do like want to be able to handle, like if you drop it on top of this, maybe you want to switch the locations of them, like swap them. All you would have to do is override the on drop inside of the inventory entry widget. So come in here and say on drop, and you just switch them around or do whatever you want to do. But it seems like this is working fine. So I think we are good to go. If you enjoyed the tutorial, please leave a like and subscribe. Thanks.